Hey everyone, this is Nick and I'm now really a YouTuber because I got my first content warning on an old video I made about how to fix YouTube. They didn't like that, but 2 years after the fact, apparently. Anyway, this week in the Linux and open source news, we've got Python refusing a $1.5 million grant because the strings attached to that money are a bit unacceptable. We also have Unity, the desktop, not the 3D engine, maybe suffering a second demise after efforts to revive it have sort of faltered. And we also have the AUR being DDoSed yet again, and we still don't know by whom, so we're gonna take a look at that as well. And we're also gonna take a look at our sponsor, TuxCare. The TuxCare provides all the tools that you need to automate the maintenance and security of your open source stack with enterprise support for Alma Linux and Rocky Linux, but also rebootless patching and endless lifecycle support that keeps end-of-life distros as well as open source runtimes, apps and libraries patched and secure. They also have a lot of resources on their website's show notes page to stay informed about open source, Linux, IT, and software development. It is a cool sneak peek of the conference floor of some of the most important developer events globally. They give you access to show notes and video recordings of past conferences, complete with the slides. They currently have topics like technical and shitification, something I often cover on this channel, but they also cover things like using AI in software development and in various IDEs, and a lot more. So you can check out all the past video recordings and everything they'll do in the future using the link down in the description, and of course you can bookmark that or add it to an RSS feed if you prefer. Okay, so let's start with Python, and this one is probably going to earn me a bunch of angry comments because Python refused a $1.5 million grant from an organism that is funded by the US government. You might wonder why a small organization like the Python Foundation would turn down that big amount of money because their annual budget is around $5 million. They only hire 14 people. And the reason is because the US government attached a bunch of strings to that grant. They required that the Python Foundation would not operate or stop any programs that advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, or what people in the US call DEI. They would be required to not implement any of those policies on the project funded by the grant, but also at the entire foundation level. Now, this grant would have served to help with lessening the risks of supply chain attacks, with creating an automated review process for PyPI packages and other things of that ilk, so obviously important work. The problem is, there's not just the DEI issue. If the US government or the funding organism didn't like something the Python Foundation did during the time where that money was being spent, they could first take back what was left of the money, but they could also ask for what they spent back, meaning the foundation would potentially have had to reimburse them in full at some point if the US government decided they didn't like how they handled something. Python deemed this unacceptable. They also point out that they have a commitment in their mission statement to grow and support a diverse and international community, and that they aren't willing to compromise on that mission statement. They're disappointed in having to turn down the money, but the uncertainties around this grant are just too strong, as they say. The language around those is very broad, and these restrictions are new and untested by other projects, so it's too risky and they don't want to be the test case for such a program. Now, accepting this grant under these conditions would frankly be absolute madness. Imagine, you're doing the work, you spend the money, everything is done, and a year after that, this funding organism knocks on your door and says, hey, at that point you hired someone that is transgender, that is DEI, give us back $1.5 million. On an operating budget of $5 million, this would basically bankrupt the Python Foundation. This would be entirely unacceptable. Imagine if, in your business, the client had the right to take back everything that they paid you just because they did not like one of your employees. This would be absolute nonsense, and obviously no one would accept these terms, so props on the Python Foundation for refusing it. After the efforts to revive Unity, the desktop environment that culminated in the release of a few versions of Ubuntu Unity, it seems like the project just is not getting enough traction. Ubuntu 25.10 with Unity, the Unity flavor, was not released because there were too many bugs in there, and Mike Adamietz, one of the lead developers, called for help on the Ubuntu discourse. They just do not have enough time and skill expertise to make progress on this desktop. He says that the bugs in 25.10 were just too big to release an ISO. These bugs will also apply to an upgrade, which is why they haven't released it either. And he says that Unity is currently broken and needs to be fixed. The problem is, the person doing most of the coding, called Rudra, he's at university. He just doesn't really have time to focus on that anymore, which is normal. At some points your priorities have to shift, but the remaining members of the team just do not have the coding expertise to handle all of that work. So they're currently looking for solutions. They will do whatever they can to keep going, but they're also asking for people to come and help them, because if not, this Unity spin-off of Ubuntu will just die off, and it's going to be the second demise of Unity, which would suck. I always liked Unity as a desktop. I know a lot of people didn't. The first releases were sort of ho-hum, not that great, but generally the desktop itself was a good vision. It worked well, it had some good ideas, and at the end of its life, it was actually quite speedy, quite nice. It was a good desktop. It would be very sad to see it go away again for a second time, but sometimes this is what happens. There's probably a lot of work to be done to make that desktop Wayland compatible, to make that desktop use more modern libraries, to migrate it to newer versions or to the newest bases of Ubuntu, and I don't know if many people really want to do that work, because we already have tons of options out there, and I don't know if Unity in today's world provides something that's really that interesting. But this week, the AUR once again came under attack. It's the usual distributed denial of service stuff. The Arch team this time has deployed DDoS protections, which are mitigating the issue, but it also blocked all pushes for the AUR, so no updates and no new apps and packages are coming into the AUR for now, because this protection system doesn't handle SSH connections on port 22, which is what is used to push software to the AUR. Now, the repo is accessible, users can download stuff from it. The Arch team is unfortunately not sharing anything about who might be responsible for these attacks, and it's starting to become a recurrent thing these days, and it's pretty worrying for Arch users. Now, at the time I'm recording this, things still seem affected, but maybe by the time you're watching it, things will have been solved. Now, it's kind of annoying to not know where this is coming from. Either the Arch team hasn't identified the source, but as far as I can understand it, in DDoS attacks, it's not that tricky to know where the attack is coming from, or they know who it's coming from and they don't want to say, which is even worse. Anyway, it's a recurring problem on the AUR and Arch, and I would really like to know what's happening, because it is a big disturbance for people using that distro. Now, we do have a release date for the Cosmic desktop. It should arrive before the end of the year, at least according to Carl Ritschel, System76's founder and CEO. He said on Twitter that the release date is planned for December 11th with PopOS 24.04 LTS, which I will maintain is a dumb name for a distro releasing in December of 2025. He also says that after that, starting with PopOS 26.04, releases will align with the regular Ubuntu LTS cycle. They're aiming for 2 weeks after the Ubuntu release for theirs, and at that point the naming scheme will make sense again. It looked like the beta for Cosmic was pretty stable and pretty complete in my personal tests, so that's not super surprising, but of course Cosmic has a solid history of delays, so maybe they won't hit that release date. We'll have to wait and see. Now, I didn't make a video about the beta because I just didn't find that many new things compared to the final alphas that I tested, so I'm gonna wait for the final release to make a dedicated video on PopOS and Cosmic. The good thing is they're using an old LTS base, so they probably don't have that much to do with it, apart from maybe replacing the kernel and the Mesa or NVIDIA drivers in their own repos, so they only have to focus really on the Cosmic desktop itself, which is better than focusing on the base and on the desktop. And by the time they migrate to 26.04 as the base, well, they will have a solid implementation of Cosmic that has been tested by many users for many months, so it should be pretty solid. I like Cosmic, I think it's a fine desktop, and so obviously you'll get a video in December when it comes out. A nice step forward for browser extensions. Firefox will now require that all new extensions disclose their data collection practices. This will begin in early November, and developers will then be required to list what they collect in their manifest.json file. That's the file that lists what the extension does, the various APIs it uses, and now also the data they collect. So starting November the 3rd, they'll have a new key in there affectionately named browser-specific settings.gecko data collection permissions, and they have to use that to declare all that they collect. Only new extensions are required to do this for now, but all existing extensions will also have to do so in the first half of 2026, and this information will be listed in the pop-up that appears when you install an extension to your browser and in the permissions and data section of Firefox's extensions page. Extensions that don't collect anything will also have to declare that in the same field, meaning the user can actually see what they will give away in exchange for functionality. Extensions that don't disclose what they collect or are reported by users for misrepresenting this collection will be blocked from the entire developer portal. It's nice, it's a good step for privacy, it's not intrusive for users because you already had that pop-up showing when you wanted to install an extension. Now it's just going to have more information about the data that is being collected. So I think it's good, it's just going to be more helpful, and it puts a few restrictions on developers to make sure that they don't do anything too shady. After many months, maybe even more than a year of deliberation and tests, Ubuntu finally moved forward with architecture-specific package variants. Starting with Ubuntu 25.10, you can now get x86 64 v3 packages, which are optimized and compiled specifically for modern Intel and AMD hardware that supports more recent instructions. They had to make changes to dpkg, apt, and launchpad as well, which is the place where they built those packages, and they can now serve different versions of the packages depending on what your hardware actually supports. Only 2,000 packages are covered for now, that's most of the main Ubuntu repo, but they hope to be able to build all the packages in the Ubuntu repos for this architecture variant for 26.04 LTS. Now, do not expect this to transform the performance of your entire system. Most packages will give you about 1% better performance than the non-optimized ones, some of them bringing better performance, of course. You can actually upgrade your current 25.10 systems to move to this variant. The Ubuntu Discourse post that I linked in the description has all the details. Now, for a 1% performance improvement, I'm not sure that all the work and the resources being consumed by this are really worth it. If you look at the energy consumption of building and storing these packages, is it really worth it for 1% savings across millions of computers? I have no idea. Maybe it is, but as a user, it is kind of cool. You make sure that you install the packages that give you the best performance and take advantage of all that your hardware supports, and it doesn't detract from the experience of people who would not support these newer instructions, so it's good for everyone. Now, Mozilla is preparing another improvement to Firefox, this time to the address bar recommendations, the little drop down that pops down when you start searching for something. These are currently pretty much useless on Firefox, apart from showing you some elements of your browsing history. The search recommendation part of that drop down are just not that interesting to me. They just take you to a search results page, and honestly, by the time I look at what they're offering, tap the down arrow and then enter, I would have just completed what I was typing and hit enter. It just doesn't save any time. What they're trying to change here is to show more information. For example, typing a flight number would show you the actual details of said flight straight in the drop-down. Or they would show site recommendations that match a fuzzy URL that you're not completely remembering. Or they could show the main picture, address, and rating, and the open-closed status of a business you're looking for. They could even recommend the best rated business for a specific query. The issue with this system previously seemed to be privacy. They did not want to send your search queries to Mozilla directly, but they've now built the architecture needed for this. They're encrypting the query with oblivious HTTPS, which basically means that the IP will be visible to a relay operated by Fastly, but that relay cannot see the text of your query. That text is only shown to Mozilla, but they don't get the IP address, so no one can connect the two. They will start with the US at first, and if it works well, they'll expand to other regions in the world, but it seems nice. It's gonna make these things a bit more useful. It doesn't seem like it's being operated by AI either, which I like, and it seems to be privacy respecting. And obviously you'll be able to disable those recommendations if you really don't want them or if you think they slow down your system. So it's the kind of features that I want to see in Firefox, not the AI sidebars, AI chatbots, or page summaries or link previews. I don't care about any of that. I just want useful features for normal web browsing. I don't want to replace my web browsing with AI. I want to improve my web browsing without AI, please. Now, of course, this week Fedora 43 was released, updating not only the original GNOME edition, but also the KDE one, the atomic variants like Silverblue, and the various spins based on other desktop environments. You can thus expect GNOME 49 and all of its improvements that we covered at length on this channel. I'm not going to go back on that. They also are moving to Wayland only for GNOME. They're replacing the video player with Showtime. They have a new emoji font as well on Fedora that should render better on screen, and plenty of changes under the hood like compressed init RAM disks, a bigger boot partition, and more. The KDE edition of Fedora KDE is on Plasma 6.4 right now, not 6.5 because it was released too close to the release date of Fedora 43. I've been told they could upgrade it to 6.5, so we'll see. And Fedora is always a very nice distro. I remember when I started using Linux in 2006, people just shied away from it because it was considered way less stable than something like Ubuntu. It was just not as compatible with many computers because it had a very strict policy on firmware and drivers, which it still has, but options to install those are now way easier than back in the day. It has progressed quite a bit. Nowadays, I would recommend Fedora over Ubuntu for a lot of people. And yeah, I think it's always a nice thing when a new Fedora update releases. They're not bleeding edge, but they're advanced enough in the Linux stack that it really gives a nice showcase of what things will be for virtually every distro in the future. I think it's cool. Now let's finish this episode with a few things about gaming. First, Windows games on Linux have never been better supported, judging from the ratings on ProtonDB, which, yes, those are user-submitted and sometimes they're a bit higher than they should. People can be over-enthusiastic there. It seems like about 90% of Windows games on Steam now run on Linux. The games with a borked rating, meaning they just don't run at all, are now about 10%. The rest are very few bronze-rated games that really don't run very well and require you to do some manual tweaks. There's also about 20% of games rated silver that run but aren't perfect, and 2/3 of gold and platinum games which are pretty much perfect. Platinum-rated games, they're about 50% of the entire total. Among most games that are borked, as in they don't run at all, a lot of them, it's just due to anti-cheat reasons as well, which means the game actually runs, it's just that the server doesn't let you connect to it. Now that's pretty neat. Linux is a very viable platform for gaming these days, as showcased by the Steam Deck, SteamOS, and other devices coming with SteamOS pre-installed. Now, of course, the focus should probably be on trying to bring those silver and bronze rated games, even the gold ones, to a more platinum status to make sure that they can all run with just one click, one install, nothing to add, nothing to configure, because that's the best experience you can provide users. For the borked games, you would have to solve the entire anti-cheat issue, which is going to be a lot more work than just bringing all the games that run kinda bad, running them at a very much more consistent level on Linux. It's still an insane time to be a Linux gamer. Things were not like that even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it progressed absolutely insanely fast on that front. And on that same topic, it seems like the ROG Xbox Ally, the handheld from Asus with Microsoft branding and a partnership around it and optimizations made for Windows specifically, it seems like this device runs faster with Linux than with Windows anyway. This thing was supposed to bring a new full-screen handheld interface and some specific Windows optimizations to make the thing run more smoothly, but it still looks like Linux wins on this device, and by a sizable margin. A YouTuber called Cyber Dopamine conducted a bunch of tests. I have no idea if they are a trustworthy source or not, but they were picked up by various websites, so I would say probably they are. Bazzite was installed on this handheld in those tests, and it yielded about 32% more FPS in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, and even at lower wattages, it's still 6% better performance on Linux. Hogwarts Legacy got 24% more FPS on Bazzite, and apparently these frame rates are much more stable on Linux as well. And the general experience of using the device was also better on Bazzite because, for example, waking up and putting the device to sleep is faster on Linux. On Windows, it seems to take 40 seconds to go to sleep and 15 seconds to wake up, when on Linux it's kind of instant. We all know that on a technical level, Linux is just a better platform for handhelds than Windows. It's just leaner, it uses less disk space, it is also better optimized, it provides better performance. It's just not a bloated mess that has decades and decades of old compatibility stuff for programs. It just runs things the way they should be run without extra bloat, and so it's obviously going to yield better performance for the same games. And hopefully other manufacturers see that and start installing SteamOS instead of Windows, so people can get used to that and developers can start working on anti-cheat solutions so we can bring the last few missing games to our platform as well. And we'll conclude on a little annoyance on the Steam Deck. Ghost of Tsushima is now Steam Deck verified, at least the director's cut of it is, which might sound good, but it only reached that rating because they split off the multiplayer mode as a DLC, a multiplayer mode that uses the PlayStation overlay, which currently doesn't work with Proton, and thus made the rating worse. But by splitting off this multiplayer mode, they can now say that the main game is verified, except DLC don't have their own ratings. So people might buy the game and think it runs fine, and then download the multiplayer mode and realize it doesn't work and that the game was indeed not verified and kinda broken in some parts of it. And that really sucks. Now for Ghost of Tsushima, I don't think that's a big deal. This is really a single player title. I completed it 100% on PS5 and I didn't even notice it had a multiplayer mode. So either it is a recent addition or a version specific for the director's cut, or I completely missed it in the game. That's not a game I would ever want to play multiplayer anyway for. It's a single-player driven experience. But for other games, imagine Call of Duty splitting off the multiplayer mode as DLC. They could say the game is verified on the Steam Deck because the campaign works, and then when you try to go multiplayer, then nope, nothing happens, and you're done. That would suck, and I hope Valve stamps out those practices immediately, because this is a slippery slope that we do not want to engage in. But what you might want to engage in is those devices from our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they're the only manufacturer I use for all of my daily driver computers. Everything you see, hear, or read from me, or watch from me, or whatever, is done on one of their laptops, the InfinityBook Pro 16. It's an older model with a dedicated GPU in it, and everything that I do for gaming is done on one of their computers as well, the Tuxedo Cube, which is sitting right under my TV, and which I use as a Steam gaming console. They have options for everyone, price points that should fit every need, and they're really, really fantastic. So as usual, the link is down in the description of the video or of the podcast. Anyway, this will conclude this video. Thank you all for watching it or listening to it in the background. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons are and why you should click them. You also have plenty of links down in the description to support the channel. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!